Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen.
Amen.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who selected us from all nation, kindred, and tongue, and gave us your Torah. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of the Torah. Amen.
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 We kindle these lights because of the wondrous deliverance you performed for our ancestors. During these 8 days of Hanukkah, these lights are sacred. We're not to use them, but only to behold them, so that they will rouse us to give thanks for your wondrous acts of deliverance.
This is a little light of mine. I'm going to let it shine. Welcome to our Hanukkah lectorium. And I have basically decided to make a weirdest connection ever. The reason why, it's always a challenge for me, what are we going to speak on the Hanukkah? Last year it was kind of a Christmaka, remember? When Christmas and Hanukkah was the same day. So we spoke Jesus demystified. So I was thinking, what am I going to do this year? Because, first of all, talking about the story of menorah, it's kind of nice, but there is lots of fiction in this. The story of the fact that after Maccabees came to the temple and they cleaned up the temple after the Antiochus Epiphanes have defiled it with idols and stuff like this, and then they had the only one flask with proper oil, and the oil has to be proper because when you are in the sanctuary, which is laid out inside with gold, if this thing is not properly clean, it's gonna make lots of soot. And with the technique of making oil with this kind of a huge basalt wheel, you're gonna have lots of particles from the pits. So to make a proper oil, it needs to sit long enough for this sediment to go down, and you carefully strain it because it's also the problem, you don't have that kind of a fine cloth through which you can now strain something. So it takes a while to actually produce a proper oil that would burn without the black smoke. Sona and I discussed about the oil, and Sona asked, what is the special in that? And I said, as long as it doesn't have any additives to it, because now they make all kinds of additives to oil for taste. You know, they can put balsamic. And we don't want this stuff, which is for good for salad, to be just burning, making it smell. But now, you know, extra virgin probably works fine. So the legend, and that is the legend, says that this oil was burning from one flask, which is sufficient only for one day, supply, it was burning for 8 days before the new freshly made batch of oil arrived, and it's called the Hanukkah miracle. But folks, I'm going to repeat it again. This is just a legend. The idea of Hanukkah having the 8 days came from the fact that the Feast of Tabernacles, the Sukkot, was celebrated for 8 days too. And since they didn't have it, they just made a decision to have it as the Thanksgiving for liberation. And that's why they decided to commemorate these days with light. And that's why, since they couldn't afford, they just had only one flask lamp burning for the evening, and that was sufficient for the level of poverty they lived in the 1st and 2nd centuries in Judea. And this kind of candelabra came much later, when people got richer. What is the liberation from? This is what we are going to talk today. And what does it have to do in atheism? With atheism? Well, let me repeat again to you that my task was extremely challenging because I could not just pass it. This year is a 100th anniversary of the existence of the arch enemy of the United States. Right? And when I say 100 years, a Russia under Tsar was not a problem for the United States. It was Russia of Stalin, Khrushchev, and all of it. And, well, I tell you, I am still learning. It is interesting for me to learn about how American people in the 70s, when I was growing up in a Soviet school, how they reacted and what were they thinking back in the 70s. And there was some fear. Am I right?
Yeah, because they wanted communism.
Yeah, so what was the fear about? You said communism. What is communism all about? 100 years ago happened probably the largest global experiment in the world. The attempt to change society and make it live under what everybody knows as a communism. But what communism is all about, and how in the world is this connected with Hanukkah? So this is what these 3 lectures are all about. Because the subject is very complex, and it does have some biblical foundation for this. You know, many Russians asked me specifically, is there a biblical prophecy about the communist Russia? Not specific, but about the communism? Yes. And
The North.
we'll look into this, and that's why I called my first lecture Atheism from Hellenistic Greece to revolutionary France. Because we cannot speak about communism without understanding what was the cause of it. Because communism, what happened on November 7, 1917, did not come at once, abruptly, and unexpectedly. What happened in November 7, 1917, which created the major source of tension until this day. Because communism is not gone. Communism is somewhat is gone from Russia, but it's not gone from North Korea, which is still creating quite a headache, especially for us here.
They had their own Bolshevik revolution.
Well, they had their own because they were helped, and all of it. What we've experienced. Mao, Castro, Kim, and all these nice guys, including Assad and Gaddafi and all of it, it was a good consequences, quote unquote good, of the Cold War between the two world systems. But this world system did not start 100 years ago. The preparation to it was going in entire world for a good 200 plus years. But I would even challenge your mind further by saying that the foundation of it go as far back as 6th century BC. And this is what Hanukkah is all about. Hanukkah is a clash between Judaism and Hellenism. Judaism as a religion based on the Torah, and Hellenism as the way of thinking based on these individuals. Let's take a look at them. This is probably the most ancient known to us Greek philosopher. Thales, am I pronouncing him correctly?
Sounds good to me.
Of Miletus. See?
It's probably Thales.
Thales? Okay.
I'm guessing.
Just because the
I
way
don't
that they
know.
pronounce all the other kinds of ways. Viteros militus.
Okay. Anyway,
As you put a southern accent on, it's different.
one of the first theorems in geometry, which we studied in the 6th grade of our school, is the theorem of Thales, or Thales, whatever.
That guy.
Now, that guy, he is considered to be the progenitor of philosophy. What is philosophy. The word philosophy comes from two Greek words. Philios means love, and sophos means wisdom. Love to wisdom. And boy, these people were wise. These people wanted to comprehend the world. This guy, he was a genius. He was everywhere. We have the traces of Pythagoras everywhere. In the scales of the piano and in geometry. Everywhere. Thales and Pythagoras were actually, if we look in some sources, especially about the Thales, they got their education nowhere else but in Egypt. Yes. In Egypt. Based on archaeology, we know about Egyptians, that the Egyptian science was very developed. They had a very developed medicine. They had a very developed astronomy. So basically, what these guys are, they're the products of the Egyptian civilization, which basically jumped across Mediterranean. Egypt had technology, all kinds of stuff. Well, Israel had a problem. Do you remember during the time of Saul and the time of Judges, when the main enemy of Israel was who? Philistines, thank you. And what kind of technological advantage did Philistines have?
China.
Yeah, Philistines could produce iron swords where Israelites only bronze. And bronze sword against iron is just bang.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't have technology. Where did Philistines had technology from? Well, from the trade connections. The trade connections was the spread of all kinds of things, ideas and things like that. And what does the Torah says? Don't make any covenant with pagan nations. Spiritual purity and faithfulness to God came to Israel at a cost of not having access to a certain technologies. The modern world is the same. Talking about the Cold War period and communist ideology. Well, if I am not mistaken, 1951, Bardeen, Brattain, and Stockley, if I'm correct, invented transistor.
Yeah, PNP transistors.
That allowed to decrease the size of any kind of radio transmitting computing device by creating a nicely compact boards, circuit boards of that size instead of that size with electronic lamps, right? This created a progress in discrete mathematics and cybernetics, which led to a discovery of the microchips, which went into microprocessing units of the further computers. Soviet Union had a different approach. Soviet Union ideology, Mr. Khrushchev declared under the influence of some of the party leaders, cybernetics is a whore of imperialism. So any scientists that were dealing with semiconductors or any of this stuff were banned and banished. As a result, in 1985, when we discovered how far are we behind, back former we, Russians, discovered how far are they behind from the West, created a joke which was called Soviet microcalculators are the largest microcalculators in the world.
They all have vacuum tubes in them.
Yeah. So I remember while people in America were enjoying already a color television sets from Sony and Panasonic, and how did Japanese get that? Because of the now Japanese no longer enemy but a friend of the United States. So there was a share of the technology. And for the Russians, there is a Jackson-Vanik law prohibiting anybody to supply Russians with any microchip technology. So we had a black and white TV, which was all kind of jittery. Somebody would turn on electric shaver in the next door apartment. It was not the way how we fixed this. Just
And the picture would be this big, and the box was this big.
yeah. So nothing changes. Tradition, I mean, the connection creates the technology. Well, Egyptian knowledge came to these guys, to Thales, to Pythagoras, to Democritus, the father of modern atom or atomism. Back then they had no idea of the model of Rutherford, but they still believed that the matter consists of atoms. Well, what is this all about? It is about mind. Mm-hmm. It is about reason. What philosophy is all about. The way how it was conceived in 6th and 5th century BC. It was about comprehending the world with human mind. Mm-hmm. This philosophy, well, as opposed to revelation. See, Greece and Hellenism is all reason. Torah and Judaism is revelation. Mm-hmm. Oh. In Greece, we have I am able to comprehend. If not me, then somebody next generation after me will be able to understand and comprehend this world. And Torah says, and God said to Moses, and God said to Moses, and God said to Moses. You see the contrast?
Yeah.
Okay, let's further up. Plato. Plato is the father of idealism. His works was about the society and about the human nature. Plato is the one who invented the concept of human psyche, or the soul. But he had a faithful disciple who went further. Aristotle, the father of the progenitor of physics. In fact, he invented this word because one of his fundamental works was physics. Who was Aristotle? Aristotle was the teacher of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was encouraged and inspired by Aristotle to take on the world. Why did Alexander the Great gathered all his men and they went against Persia? Because not only they wanted to secure Greece from Persian invasion, but they were on a mission to spread the wisdom of Greeks, to the world. And this is what they did. By 311, Judea was a part of the great Hellenistic Empire, which after the death of Alexander the Great split into 4 major kingdoms. At first, Judea was under the southern kingdom, which was former Egypt, Ptolemies. But after a while, his northern rival, Seleucids, the dynasty of Seleucids, which was in Assyria, overcame, and Judea became the part of Seleucid kingdom. And this is where the problem began. Ptolemies were very tolerant about what Jews believed and what they did. Ptolemies were more pluralistic. Egyptian Ptolemaic Empire was very Hellenistic, but it had room for other thinking. Seleucids did not allow that. Antiochus Epiphanes was on a mission to convert Jews into his way of thinking. That is what started the Maccabean War.
Oh, really?
Not just the miracle of 8 candles, whatever, but it's a war of ideas. There were a number of priests who bought into the ideas of Hellenism. And this is how Sadducees originated.
You fly like the winds of Jordan, more fierce than a lion's
the Maccabean revolt succeeded. It succeeded, and it meant the victory of Judaism over Hellenism. Judaism, going back to what it is, whose source is divine revelation. And the Torah is the first fruit of divine revelation. You see why I was talking about the Greek philosophy?
Yeah.
Hanukkah is not just a kind of a victory day. Hanukkah is not just a story of oil and candles. Hanukkah is not about the nice deep fried latkes and donuts. Hanukkah, it's a feast of dedication. Dedication to believe rather than to reason.
Mhm.
That's what Hanukkah is all about.
To believe.
That's
Ha-
huge. That's huge.
That's
Very huge.
this is why I strongly believe that Christians will benefit from Hanukkah much more than from any other holidays of the
Santa Claus.
season.
Mm.
And that's why we do it. Because it's a time for us to reflect what path do we choose. And this is not easy. You see, the balanced faith in revelation, as we see it in the Bible, is very hard to hold.
Yeah, that is.
After September 11, actually not exactly September 11, but there was a disaster, air disaster over Queens with the American airliner fell down because of the unusual wake of turbulence. You know, it's tail severed. It affected me badly because I fly a lot. And I began to have what is called a fear of flying, which is not an easy thing to overcome. But because of my background in physics, I began to study the engineering of aircraft and things like this. And I have come to the term which is called flight envelope. What is actually happening on a high altitude, a commercial airliner is faced with two major issues. That's why human hand does not control it. You need a computer to control it. You have to keep your airspeed just right, because as higher you are, then it's more comfortable flying, no lesser turbulence, and more efficient. But you have a very thin difference between what is known as overspeed and underspeed. If your speed is too high, your airframe is going to start breaking apart. But if your speed is too low, your wing is going to lose lift, and you're going to fall, and you're going to turn from the aircraft into a brick, and the gravity will take over. So, when we talk about reason and revelation, we're facing the same problem. Here is Judaism. Judaism with its belief in Torah as a divine revelation. Judaism, which in a way suffers the cost of this belief in revelation, because Israel doesn't have enough connection to develop the science and technology, because all this science and technology comes packaged with pagan ideas that are deadly. But what's the other extreme? The other extreme is dogmatism. This is what happened after Christianity took over. Fanatical Christians of the 3rd century burned Alexandrian library. Later, Christianity, especially papacy, adopted Aristotelian worldview as a church dogma. And so, when somebody like Copernicus or Giordano Bruno suggested that actually Earth orbits the sun, they were fried on a stake. Dogmatism was suppressing Europe so badly that at the Middle Ages, Paris looked like Mogadishu, and Baghdad was the most civilized city in the world. Because in Paris, they didn't know anything about hygiene, and in Baghdad, they had doctors, mathematicians, and all the development, we talk about the science, we're talking about physics, that's Greek, geometry, that's Greek, but what about algebra? Algebra, it's Arabic.
It is.
Arabs and Muslims developed algebra, and actually they provided us with the numbers, which we use. So, dogmatism is kind of like underspeed. So, where did it go historically? Well, fast forward from ancient Greece to France of the Renaissance time. See, dogmatism could not hold for too long. This was an effect of a pressure cooker. If you have a very tight pressure cooker and you don't let any steam out and you let it sit, it will blow through. This was the first. René Descartes. Without Descartes, is this how we pronounce him?
Descartes, yeah.
Descartes.
Good.
Without Descartes, we wouldn't know what the coordinates are. Axle X, axle Y, axle Z, all of this. But Descartes was a philosopher. Mathematics was the part of the philosophy. And Descartes says, I exist because I reason. Because I reason. Because I think. Whatever is not comprehensible through reason cannot exist. This is the beginning of modern philosophy. Resurrection of Jesus cannot exist. Why?
Can't be reproduced, can't be tested.
Can't be comprehended through reason. How a dead person, fully dead, not clinically dead, can. The crossing of the Red Sea cannot exist. How in the world can you explain that the water formed two walls on the opposite side using the wind and they were standing straight? You see? Descartes was not only the father of modern philosophy, but also progenitor of liberal theological thinking. But where is the balance? Could the science be? Could there be? That's the question. Could there be a way where we can be exploring technology and science and still be faithful to God? Well, the same France and the same era of Renaissance, which is actually the era of the Reformation, but we have another gentleman, Blaise Pascal. If you want to measure a pressure in your tires, you do it with this gauge. That is Pascal. In fact, in international system, the pressure is measured not in pound to square inch, but in pascals. So this man was actually a faithful man of God, physicist and mathematician, and philosopher, somewhat philosopher. I can't call him a philosopher. He's officially called a philosopher, but when you look at his statements, this is not a philosophy. This is his reflection on God.
Ideology almost.
Yes. In fact, it is to him the famous test belongs. Test of atheist versus believer. What he said is, a believer has nothing to lose. If God doesn't exist,
Pascal's wager.
if believer dies and the atheist dies, that's it. But if God does exist, then there will be a judgment and a resurrection. And believer will receive reward, while an atheist will definitely regret. Isaac Newton was not only an author of the works, mathematical foundations of natural philosophy. He was not only the one who discovered three fundamental laws of mechanics and the law of gravity. He was also Bible scholar and commentator. He had his teacher, Sir Barrow, and with his teacher they created the first commentary on the book of Daniel, explaining the head of gold, the brass of silver, and the bronze and iron of the image from the Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which we use until today. But it was the 17th century, the age of Puritanism in England, the age of clash between traditional Protestantism and nonconformism. Nonconformists did not want to obey and worship in accordance with the acts of Parliament, but they wanted to worship God in accordance to their conscience.
Mm-hmm.
And that age has ended pretty quickly, and the new era began. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Denis Diderot, and famous François-Marie Arouet, known as Voltaire. These and a couple others were called encyclopedists. What they created, look at the title and see what's in there. Dictionnaire raison.
Reason.
Dictionary of reason. Des sciences, des arts et des métiers.
It's the Reasonable Dictionary of Sciences.
Yeah.
And the arts.
Reason, or dictionary of reason. A reasonable dictionary. You see, this is what this was created. This is considered a major philosophical textbook used by French Revolution. As you can see, the world is going in circles. Hanukkah is example of a successful resistance to the major trend, the godless philosophy. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and bring to nothing the understanding of prudent. Where is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? Wisdom in Greek, Sophia. Make no mistake. Paul is speaking about philosophy. And he juxtaposes it. He calls philosophy, Sophia, the wisdom of this earth. And now he goes and contrasts it with the wisdom of God. For since in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God. This is the wisdom of God. The wisdom of God is presented to this world through His revelation. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but those things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words in this Torah. You see, what we have here is God's modus operandi. God says there are many things that humans cannot comprehend. They belong to God. But there are things that God reveals? Well, God allows us not only to read what the scripture says, but he does allow us to discover, based on experiment and our experience, which is guided by the principles laid in the Holy Scripture. But the other hidden things, which go beyond the range of our direct experimental discovery, they're hidden. They belong to God. What does it mean? When we look at different theories which are today very popular and often through the media and television presented as the final and absolute known facts. When we look at them, we discover two things. Number one, there is no direct evidences or observations that can prove this fact. These facts, which are presented as something given, which we are supposed today to take for granted, are usually based on some conjectures dictated by the philosophy or the system of beliefs which a particular person has. Unfortunately, our world and media provides a good bully pulpit
Boy, they do.
to propagate these ideas. That's what Paul is talking about when he speaks about the wisdom of God and contradicts it with the wisdom of this world. And he says that the wisdom of this world did not help to know God. And you can't discover God through reasoning or through scientific experiment. You can discover God only through personal testimony, personal experience, and faith. And the personal experience and faith go hand to hand. Because when something happened to us, there's always many interpretation of why it happens to us. Because in a science, there is a stage of observation and measurement, and then the stage of interpretation of the result. So all puts back of what we interpret. And unfortunately, this is what was not happening in the history of the world. The world was going in circles. From Greek philosophy to Hanukkah, which was a successful pushback on the Greek philosophy, but then subsequent development of Christianity in the wrong direction led to a ecclesiastical dogmatism.
Wow. Okay.
Church dogmatism.
Yep. Dog.
And dogmatism created a pressure cooker, which was simmering for roughly 1,000 years until it blew up. And that's what inspired the trend of thinking, which in America today is all lumped into one word: Communism. And here are the fathers of what laid in as a foundation of classical communist philosophy. The French encyclopedists inspired German philosophy. Immanuel Kant, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, with his dialectical materialism, which gave a lift to Mr. Karl Marx. Among all the trained philosophers which I showed you, starting from Thales all the way through Diderot, Rousseau, and Hegel. This is the first Jew. Why is this man, this Jewish man, decided to think what he was thinking? Tomorrow, we're going to talk about a very painful question. Why is it that Jews, after so many years centuries of being faithful to the Torah, being victorious on Hanukkah, why in the 19th century they started going into that direction? And this is very significant question because the majority of Jews I meet, Russian, Soviet Jews, are atheists. Hanukkah was the fight, was the victory of the people of the book. Marx is indeed a man of reason. Heavenly Father, help us to reflect during these Hanukkah days on the history and the development of this world. Help us to realize where we stand. Help us to really be the people of the book and connect with the people of the book.
Amen.
And appreciate the people of the book. And the main thing, appreciate the book which you are the author of.
Amen.
Our God, Creator, and Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.